Part 3. The Lie That Survived. The treaty worked. For centuries, the night grew quieter. Stories turned into warnings instead of memories. Vampires became legends, then metaphors, then fiction. And the truth was buried beneath layers of myth. When Europeans arrived, they saw no monsters, only vast land and people who feared certain places without knowing why. The vampires obeyed the treaty, but humans did not. Sacred lands were mined, mountains split, caves opened. The sealed places were disturbed by drills and greed, not malice. Something began to wake. The vampires felt it first, a pressure they had known before the war, a hunger that was not theirs. They broke the treaty, not to feed, but to prepare. Disappearances returned, not random, targeted engineers, surveyors, men who dug too deep. The tribes tried to warn them, but the old language no longer translated. History labeled it superstition. The vampires were blamed again. That was the final lie. Because the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. The vampires were never the enemy, they were the compromise, and now as the land is carved open once more, the treaty bleeds through time. Broken not by monsters, but by progress. The war the vampires lost may have been the war that kept humanity alive, and this time, there may be no one left to negotiate. The treaty written in blood. Before the treaty, long before the land was called America, before borders, flags, and maps, the night belonged to something older. The tribes did not call them vampires, they did not give them a single name. Each nation had its own word, the pale ones, the long shadows, those who refused the sun. But all descriptions were the same. They walked like men, they spoke like men, and they fed like famine. At first, the encounters were rare. A hunter missing, a child found drained of warmth, a village waking to silence instead of screams. The elders believed these were spirits, punishments from the land itself. Offerings were made. Fires were kept burning through the night. It didn't stop them. The vampires did not hunt wildly. That was what terrified the tribes the most. They were patient, selective. They learned the paths between villages, the seasons of migration, the habits of warriors. They waited, and they adapted. Sunlight weakened them, but did not always destroy them. Fire burned, but required courage to wield. Wooden weapons could wound, but only if the heart was struck, and hearts were difficult to reach in the dark. The first wars were disasters. Entire settlements vanished, not destroyed, emptied. The land itself seemed to recoil. Animals fled, rivers were avoided. Certain forests became forbidden, not by law but by instinct. Then something changed. A single vampire was captured. He was not young. His skin was pale like stone left too long underground. His eyes did not plead when bound. They observed, calculated, as if he were the one studying his captors. They burned him. He did not die. They starved him. He did not weaken. They buried him alive. 3 days later, he was standing at the edge of the camp, silent, waiting. That was when the elders understood something horrifying. These beings were not invaders. They were residents, and they were not countless. They were few. The tribes changed their strategy. They stopped fighting blindly. They watched. They learned. And slowly, painfully, they discovered a truth the vampires had hoped would remain hidden. The Pale Ones needed the land, but they did not belong to it. And the land remembered. Part 2. The Agreement. The first meeting did not happen on neutral ground. It happened at a place no tribe claimed, a stone valley where nothing grew and sound behaved strangely. Words spoken there seemed to sink into the earth instead of echoing. The vampire who came forward was not a king. He introduced himself as something closer to a witness. His name has been lost, intentionally. He spoke without threat, without apology. "We are dying," he said. The elders did not react. They had buried too many children to care. The vampire explained what the tribes had already begun to suspect. Their kind could not replenish their numbers easily. Turning a human was dangerous. Most died. Others became unstable, feral, uncontrollable. Each loss weakened them further. The war had cost them more than it cost humanity. But the elders had their own revelation. Killing the vampires entirely would not end the nightmare, because something worse waited beneath them. The land itself was not empty before the Pale Ones arrived. It had always been guarded. And when the Guardians were disrupted, the land responded violently. Storms, fires, madness, a pressure beneath reality itself. The vampires had not come to conquer. They had come to contain. And that was the moment of war. Not with victory, but with fear. The treaty was not written on paper. It was carved into memory and sealed with blood. The terms were simple. The vampires would remain, but they would never hunt freely again. They would drink only what was given, never take children, never rule, never build. They would exist as shadows, sustained but restrained. In return, the tribes would protect the sealed places, caves, sinkholes, deep stone wounds in the earth, places where the land whispered too loudly. If the vampires broke the treaty, the tribes would reveal the old methods, not weapons, but rituals that erased names. The vampire agreed, because extinction was not the worst fate imaginable. Fate